I want to talk about Whoopi Goldberg because I got so many texts this week because she attacked me the week before. Sure. So everybody was like, oh, Bill, I get you're enjoying the karma. First of all, I'm going to talk about this at the end of my show next week, teaser. But there is no thing as karma, okay? Get over that. Whoopi attacks me on a regular basis. She says stupid on a regular basis. It just happened to coincide. But can I just say this? I had on last week Ira Glasser, former longtime head of the ACLU, talking about free speech. Whoopi Goldberg, who, by the way, I hope is still a friend. We can disagree with each other. Should not be canceled or put off her show, as much as I totally disagree with her crazy statement. Free speech.
And there it is. That was the moment everyone keeps replaying. Bill Maher didn't just push back on Whoopi Goldberg. He said, what a lot of people have quietly been thinking for years, that she can say something extreme, something over the top, something that just doesn't land and still be treated like she's above real criticism. And what makes it hit harder is that Maher isn't trying to cancel her. He's actually saying, keep her on air, let her speak. Just stop pretending every weak argument turns into wisdom just because it's delivered with confidence on The View. And this whole clash isn't just about two TV personalities going back and forth. It's about a bigger shift in media where loud certainty and moral grandstanding take over and everything starts to feel like it already has one approved answer. And when Maher goes after that, he's not just taking a shot. At a show, he's calling out a whole system that turns heated opinions into authority and then acts surprised when people stop buying into it. And none of this came out of nowhere because the moment that triggered all of this was always going to blow up the second it hit the public ear.
What did you think of Whoopi Goldberg saying it's worse to be a black person in America today than a woman in Iran? I see we were talking about the trans issue before, and the New York Times really has come over on that to the sort of the sensible, liberal, not crazy woke position. I think this is a great first step toward getting the Democrats back to sanity. And a second good step would be, we got to do something about The View. I really believe that. I mean,
it's huge in Iran, though.
It is such a brutal setup because Bill Maher doesn't ease into anything. He jumps straight from the question to the punchline and then expands it into a much bigger critique. And you can see exactly why the claim from Whoopi Goldberg that black Americans have it worse than women in Iran might sound powerful inside a studio environment like The View, where dramatic statements often get immediate reaction. But the moment it reaches people outside that bubble, the tone shifts and the first response becomes wait. Is that actually true? And that is where the real problem with outrage-driven television starts to show, because everything gets pushed to extremes. Everything is framed in a way that feels emotionally satisfying for one side, and over time, that kind of language replaces real comparison with exaggerated feeling. And once that happens, proportional thinking disappears. People stop weighing actual conditions and start reacting to narratives. And then Maher cuts through that by grounding the conversation in real-world context, real lives, real families, and measurable progress in America. And the second you move away from abstract framing and into reality, the comparison begins to fall apart and look far less convincing than it did in that controlled studio moment.
Imagine The View in Iran, all with the same head cover. You can't even tell which one is which.
My district in the great state of Texas is actually a white majority district that President Trump would have won by 25 points. As I said, I'm a direct descendant of a slave. My great-great-grandfather was born on a Rosedown plantation. I am literally being judged not by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. That's the progress, because, like, a lot of white people had to vote for me. A lot.
So wait,
I don't even ever want to hear Whoopi Goldberg's conversation about how it's worse to be black in America right now. That's a bit far. And my father, who's 75 years old, he was a man that was in the French quarters that had to go get a sandwich to the back door of the building. And his son is now a United States congressman in a white majority district in Texas as a Republican. That is America. That's America.
And that right there is why the argument from Whoopi Goldberg landed so badly. Not because racism suddenly disappeared, and not because America is flawless, but because most people can still tell the difference between a country with real problems and a system that is openly restrictive and controlled. And when Wesley Hunt brings up his own family history, it cuts through the noise because it is not theory, it is lived reality. His father experienced a very different America than the one he lives in today, and that gap matters. It shows movement, it shows change. And ignoring that change does not make a stronger argument, it makes it look like performance instead of honesty. And that is what frustrates people. There's a real difference between criticizing America and flattening everything so aggressively that you erase the progress that previous generations actually fought for, because when that happens, it does not respect history. It weakens it. And this is where Bill Maher expands the conversation beyond just one comment. He is not just pushing back on a single statement. He is challenging a broader worldview where identity becomes the primary lens for everything. And once that lens takes over, nuance disappears, and every issue gets reduced into the same simplified narrative, regardless of context or reality.
Juneteenth, that's a Texas holiday. It began in Texas in Galveston. General Granger came and read the Order Number 3 that finally abolished slavery months after the war, because the war took a time to get to Galveston. We celebrated that when I was a kid in Texas, but it becomes national a year or two ago, and Donald Trump doesn't want to celebrate that. To me, it's exactly what you're talking about. So is it 600,000 people died so that we wouldn't enslave people anymore, and the fact that freedom won is a good thing, and we should honor that. That's what Juneteenth's about. And I don't know why President Trump doesn't want to honor that.
So I don't want it. I don't want Black History Month. I don't want all these days for it to make everybody feel special. I'm an 80s baby. Everybody's too sensitive anyway. We're all Americans anyway. This holiday
That's what Morgan Freeman said.
Morgan Freeman, I can't agree more with him.
Yeah, he said that to Mike Wallace. He said, I'm an American. Do you want to be called a Jew American, Mike?
No.
Now, this is where people really start to split, because honoring history matters. Remembering what happened matters, recognizing real injustices matters, but the argument from Bill Maher is that somewhere along the line, remembrance slowly shifted into something else. It turned into branding. It turned into a way of constantly sorting people into smaller and smaller categories. And once politics becomes a constant exercise in labeling and dividing, it gets harder to hold on to any shared identity at all. And that is why this debate keeps resurfacing. Because one group hears "we are all Americans" and feels a sense of unity, while another hears the same phrase and worries that important parts of history are being smoothed over and forgotten. And that concern is real. But the pushback here is that remembering the past does not, require making division the core structure of everything. And that idea is not extreme. It is actually where a lot of people quietly stand. And then, as the conversation opens up and even gets a bit lighter on the surface, it starts to reveal something deeper, because beneath the humor, there is a real tension about how much of modern politics has turned into a kind of ritual, where identity, and especially race, becomes a signal. People feel pressured to constantly perform, rather than something discussed with balance and context.
People celebrate Juneteenth, too, and non-Italians celebrate Columbus Day. And
I'm all for any holiday.
I'm half Irish. Do I get half the day off on St. Patrick's Day?
But a lot of
I get half drunk?
Everybody gets drunk on St. Patrick's Day. That's a good point.
Did you have a question for the congressman there?
No, are you telling me you're black?
Yes.
You don't see color, right?
That exchange hits because everyone already knows the script. The approved lines, the safe way to say things without stepping out of bounds. You are supposed to acknowledge identity, but not lean too hard on it. Recognize differences, but never sound like you are defining people by them. And somehow balance all of that perfectly, every single time. And for a lot of regular people, it just feels exhausting. Like every conversation is being filtered through a corporate handbook instead of real life. And that is exactly what Bill Maher keeps pushing against. He is basically asking why every discussion has to start with breaking people down into categories before anything real can even be said, and why identity has to dominate the headline of every interaction. Because the more media spaces like The View lean into that framework, the more disconnected they start to sound from people who are just looking for competence, fairness, and basic common sense. And from there, Maher stops making it only about Whoopi Goldberg and shifts towards something bigger, a wider political culture that keeps producing the same kind of moments again and again, And that is where his critique really sharpens and starts cutting deeper than just one exchange.
Finally, new rule. Someone must tell the usual suspects on the far left that the saying is, when you're in a hole, stop digging, not keep digging. Talk about doubling down on what got you in the first place. Even the one concession I've heard a few people on the losing side offer, that liberals should stop saying the Trump voters are stupid, comes with a kind of unspoken parentheses. We know they are stupid, just don't say it. Yeah.
That is the arrogance piece, the moment where a normal political disagreement turns into something deeper. Because people can feel when they are being looked down on. They can sense that tone immediately. And that is exactly what Bill Maher is zeroing in on. He is arguing that the issue is not just messaging or branding. It is the underlying attitude, because you cannot build any real coalition if you are constantly projecting disdain toward the very people you are trying to reach. You cannot push people away, mock them, and then act surprised when they tune out. That is not a winning strategy. That is just self-satisfaction dressed up as commentary. And according to Maher, this is a lesson. Parts of the left still have not fully absorbed. They keep thinking the fix is better presentation, while ignoring the fact that tone and respect matter just as much, if not more. And then he doubles down by delivering one of his sharpest and most biting summaries of what he sees as left-wing absurdity, taking the conversation from simple disagreement into a full-blown cultural critique.
Yeah, I got bad news for you. They don't have a monopoly on stupid. You wear Queers for Palestine t-shirts and masks 2 years after the pandemic ended. And you can't define woman, I mean person who menstruates. You're the teachers' union education party, and you've turned schools and colleges into a joke. You just lost a crazy contest to an actual crazy person.
That is classic Bill Maher, half roast, half political autopsy. And whether you agree with every line or not, you can see why it lands. He is pointing out that the left keeps acting like irrationality is only a right-wing problem, while ignoring the absurdities within its own ranks. That is the taboo he keeps breaking. He does not let his side pretend it is above nonsense. And this is exactly why The View ends up in his crosshairs, because to him it is not just a talk show. It is a symbol of a refusal to self-correct. The confidence never drops. The certainty never softens, even when the take is indefensible. The energy stays the same, and he drives the point home even further when he highlights what Democratic voters themselves are beginning to push back against.
We love to speak truth to power, and we always should, but you have completely lost the ability to speak truth to bullshit. The Democratic polling firm Blueprint told Democrats months ago that black voters, aka their supposedly liberal base, were more likely to find the president too liberal than too conservative. They also found that voters didn't just want Harris to distance herself from Biden, they wanted her to distance herself from what they believe the entire Democratic Party has become, a Portlandia sketch.
The Portlandia sketch hits so hard because everyone instantly gets it. It is not liberal in the traditional sense, not practical, not grounded. It is performative, precious, so self-aware that it floats above reality, and that is the core of the image problem. Once that image sets in, every Whoopi moment feels bigger than it actually is. It stops being a single bad take and starts reading like evidence of a wider pattern. That is exactly why Bill Maher criticism resonates. He is not just talking to conservatives. He is speaking to liberals and independents who are tired of being told that nonsense automatically equals moral sophistication. And then he pivots back to The View and delivers what might be the clearest, most concise critique of the show in the entire segment.
Isn't it interesting that it's called, I don't think they meant this when Barbara Walters invented it a long time ago, but it's The View.
Well,
that's the problem in America. There is one view,
right, and
one
that's clearly
true opinion, and everybody else can go sit in the corner.
That's correct. I think that's not actually, you're right, the name raises questions, and certainly there's been some much covered internal politics on that show, but I do think that, there is space. Even that show does have space. When Whoopi said what she said, there was quick pushback from other panelists. They were like, oh, I don't know. Actually, I think that might not be right.
And that is the contradiction wrapped up in one exchange. The show is called The View singular and plural, at the same time supposedly offering many perspectives. Yet critics watch and see the same familiar pattern. Broad ideological agreement, little room for dissent, and a lot of emotional certainty presented as fearless truth-telling. To be fair, the clip does show there was some pushback and that matters, but even that highlights the problem. The pushback becomes notable precisely because viewers are accustomed to a very narrow lane. When disagreement feels surprising, that reveals how rigid the atmosphere really is, and to drive the point home, Bill Maher and his guests circle back to the same theme with even less patience, emphasizing how entrenched the pattern has become.
Attacks me on a regular basis, she says stupid. On a regular basis, they just happen to coincide. But can I just say this?
We can have platforms that have stuff on them that not everyone on that platform or who consumes stuff on that platform enjoys. And The View is a particularly weird place to do a cancellation.
It's called The View?
It's called The View. It's not called The Facts.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting that it's called, I mean, I don't think they meant this when Barbara Walters invented it a long time ago, but it's The View.
Well,
that's the problem in America.
But
there is one view,
right, and
one
that's clearly
true opinion, and everybody else can go sit in the corner.
The line "it's not called The Facts" sums up the controversy perfectly, because that is exactly how critics see The View. Not as a place to debate ideas, but as a place where feelings get certified. Once it works that way, it stops persuading and starts preaching. Preaching works for an audience that already agrees, but if the goal is to reach undecided viewers or present liberal ideas persuasively, this model fails completely. It confirms every stereotype Bill Maher is calling out. He didn't just critique Whoopi Goldberg for one outrageous comment. He exposed a media style that treats emotional exaggeration as courage and disagreement as a threat. And when that happens, people tune out, not because they can't handle tough conversations, but because they can tell when a conversation is closed. His point is clear: the left does itself. No favors. Pretending its most unserious voices are its wisest, so did Maher finally say what needed to be said about Whoopi Goldberg and The View? Drop your take in the comments, hit like, subscribe for more, and check out my new channel Blue Check News link in the description.